at episode 6 in this series today, and we'll be talking about the pachyderms, which include elephants, hippos, rhinos, tapirs, animals as such. And this area in Brookfield Zoo is kind of in the central hub of the zoo, very, very close to the central hub of the zoo. And it basically was maybe what you could call a traditional pachyderm house. So it was a big barn house with indoor caged facilities for the animals that also all had outside access to like outside pens or enclosures for each of the animals as well. One of the interesting things about this building is that from early on, as you could see here on the original plot of the zoo, it did have a lot of rock work done on the outside of the building, which I think was something relatively different or new for zoos that were built in that time period. And as you can see here, here's a very, very early aerial picture of the pachyderm house. And you could see all the rock work that was done on the outside of the building. I also have to say, while the living situation for the animals on the inside were maybe not, state-of-the-art type living facilities, the architecture of this building and the lighting for this building on the interior is very, very nice, kind of like an Art Deco-y type look. And I've always personally enjoyed looking at the way the building was actually built. I really do want to spend a lot more time in this episode on the future plans for the pachyderms, but I do want to talk a little bit about how it was set up originally and some historical information about the pachyderms in this particular zoo. So, like I mentioned, it was a very typical type setup where you had indoor small living quarters for these animals and then outdoor facilities for these animals. That was relatively standard for most zoos. But one thing I do want to kind of talk about that had a historical significance for this zoo was an elephant named Ziggy. So Ziggy was a huge male elephant, and he actually was kept indoors, enclosed, for nearly 30 years. And one of the reasons, or I should say not one of the reasons, the main reason is because it actually attacked one of the trainers/zookeepers in 1941. Ziggy was actually a pet for the Siegfried family, thus the name Ziggy. And when he outgrew the grounds or his pen in the Ziegfeld's manor, he was transferred to Brookfield Zoo. And on a personal note, I have to say, I remember as a younger kid going to the zoo and seeing Ziggy, and not only was he sequestered to his basically jail cell, he was also chained from what I remember. He had a chain on his rear leg that was connected to the wall or floor of his pen. And I don't believe they unchained him very often because he was, identified as, supposedly a dangerous animal. And specifically in 1975, Ziggy fell into the moat that was at the front side of his enclosure. And he was injured. He had some scrapes on his head, and he broke his tusk. He did have some really huge tusks, and I'm assuming suffered some other internal injuries, and they had a hard time getting him back out of the moat into his pen. And just a few months later, I guess he laid down to go to sleep, rolled on his side, and died. And the legacy of Ziggy was no longer. So aside from Ziggy, the zoo did have a number of other African elephants in their possession in the following years, and I think a lot of people know about this situation, and I don't want to spend a lot of time on it, but there is kind of a known situation out there in the zoological world that recently a lot of elephants, or I should say elephants in general, have been having issues living in zoos where they get depression, they don't like their enclosed quarters, they get sick because of the depression, and they're actually not living as long as they should be living and are dying in a lot of cases with unknown reasons. And again, like I said, I don't want to get a lot into the details. You could read up on it if you want to, but Brookfield Zoo was also one of the zoos that suffered from this, or I should say the elephants suffered from this. So because the elephants died, the pachyderm house was actually closed for a year back in like 2011. They made modifications to try to make the living quarters better for the animals, but they also at that time decided not to exhibit elephants or river hippopotamuses anymore, at least in the current state of the zoo. And so right now the only animals kept in this facility are rhinoceroses, tapirs, and pygmy hippos. But kind of jumping now into what the zoo has planned in the future so they can reintroduce elephants is something very spectacular as far as zoos go, and that's just my personal opinion. So let's flip back over to the satellite view of the zoo, and again just kind of give you some idea from a perspective standpoint of what we're talking about. So the current pachyderm area is pretty much this rectangle right here. We have the house, and then around the house there are a few different enclosures for the different animals that they have in the zoo currently. One other thing I want to point out is where Habitat Africa currently is, again, and that area is pretty much right here. So you have the giraffes, like we talked about last time. You have the forest area, which we talked about last time, and some smaller antelopes in this area. The other thing I want to point out is there's still this row of individual pens up here that house like camels and zebras, and I believe wild horses, and maybe a few other type of hooved animals. So the reason I'm pointing all this out is because the new plan, as we bring that up, will show you how all this area is going to be incorporated to make way nicer living situations for the pachyderms. Basically what the plan is showing is that the pachyderms are going to be incorporated into the Habitat Africa area and basically create an all new super huge large Africa type themed environment. So just a few simple changes I'll point out first is, again, here's the existing pachyderm building, and that is still going to be there, but the description says it's going to be an ungulated holding facility. So that will be changed into a barn for the more hooved animals. You could see that the enclosures, the outside enclosures that were right here for the elephants and rhinoceros are now gone, and that's kind of just open lawn park area with what looks like a back access to the barn. And this is where many of the other changes are going to come into play. So back over in this section of the zoo right here, we have a mixed ungulated area. So this is where I think you're going to see zebras and antelope mixed in a single shared environment, and that's in this area right here. And the thing that kind of is interesting to me is that that's kind of small for this type of environment. And I don't understand why they wouldn't utilize a lot more of this park area for that. I think when I recreate this zoo using this plan in Planet Zoo, I'm going to enlarge this area for those animals as I show here, and use all this entire park space. The other, the next thing I guess I should say I want to point out is rhinoceroses. So there's a barn here that looks like it would be a rhinoceros barn. 2 outdoor enclosure areas here, and again they have the little arrows showing that this is a shared environment that the rhinoceroses could be moved to basically give them, you know, one large shared environment like this. The next area I want to point out would be for the hippos. And the hippos have a pond area or water environment here. And there's another added water environment here for what's called African birds. So I'm guessing that's going to probably be flamingos and other waterfowl that are more common in Africa. So now let's talk about the elephants and what they're showing that they're going to do for the elephants. So back up in this area, which is where those individual pens are for, say, zebras, they're going to build a new elephant barn. And as you could see, the interior quarters are almost as big as the entire current pachyderm building that housed all the different animals. So the interesting thing about this is that the elephants are going to have several areas in which they could live. And you know, as you could see coming out of their barn, they will have an area here. They could come out of the barn and go into an area here. It will cross over into this section, and this section, and this section. And I'm assuming there's going to be some underground walkways or paths for the elephants to be able to move from one section to the other, because as you can see in this path, they are covered, or in this map, they are covered by pathways here. But you know, if you really look at it, it basically gives a big circle for the elephants to migrate around and you know, get into different environments. And then in the middle, there's another mixed undulated area, kind of like what they had over here. So again, you know, when you're in this viewing area or on these paths, you're looking at elephants and zebras crisscrossing at different angles. So it will give, I believe, the illusion of all of them being in a shared enclosure, but they'll actually be in different enclosures. But again, you could see the large area now dedicated to the elephants compared to what they had previously, or what they have probably in most any zoo out there. This is a very large area. Now, again, there's some dead space here. Not sure what that would be used for. It looks like maybe there's a berm of some sort there. But the other interesting part that I really also like about this for the elephants is right here. It says future elephant expansion. So if you look at this entire area, which again are the rest of those penned areas, some wooded areas currently in the zoo, that this will all be for elephants at some point in the future as well. So like I said, when I build my Planet Zoo version of this, I'm going to actually incorporate that in. So just a real quick recap. Right now, elephants lived in this, and you know, 1 or 2 elephants maybe shared a pen that was that big or maybe this big. And the future plans for the zoo will incorporate this entire area that I'm circling right here, you know, minus the center section. So all of this will be for elephants, which should, you know, hopefully give them a very huge happy living situation. And you know, the issues that I talked about earlier about elephants, you know, having problems living in a zoo type environment will go away. One last thing I kind of want to point out about this whole area is this dotted line. And if you look at the future plan of the zoo, this dotted line is a proposed train track for a train ride. But again, the interesting thing here is you could see it is going underneath the elephant area. So the train's almost going to have the impression of driving through the African savanna type look, and but it will go through tunnels. I'm believing, to get through and around all these different enclosures. So once again, something that is very, very interactive with guests when they would visit the zoo at this type of setup. So that pretty much wraps it up on my pachyderm episode, and we will be talking about what I'm calling feathers and scales on the next episode, and that will be covering a pretty wide variety of birds, reptiles, and I'll probably also cover a little bit of the Australia section of the zoo, grouped in with those. So that's it for now, and hope you enjoyed this episode, and I'll talk to you next time. Bye.